The wind was made of sand that day, whispering through barbed wire like an old hymn no one remembered the words to. Elias Boone rode beneath it, hat pulled low, his coat heavy with dust. The sun had long since fallen behind the mesas, leaving the sky bruised in shades of dying lavender and smoke. The prairie stretched endless before him, miles of brittle grass, fence posts leaning like old men too tired to stand straight. He had been alone so long that even the sound of his hoarse breathing felt like a memory he didn't deserve. Once, there had been laughter here. A woman humming in the kitchen, the sound of bread kneading against the table. Her name was Martha, and she had a voice that could make a church bell jealous. Now the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled into the bones and never left. Elias dismounted and led the horse into the corral. The boards creaked like they recognized him. He didn't bother lighting a lamp inside. The dark was easier. The dark never asked him to speak. But that night, something in the wind was different. It carried the scent of wood smoke that wasn't his. Far down by the road, where the land met the long stretch toward Gallows Bend, he saw them, two figures small against the dying light. A woman and a child. The woman was half carrying, half dragging the little one, her shawl whipping behind her like a torn flag. He watched for a long while, thinking they'd pass. No one came this way unless they were running from something or toward something worse. When they didn't move on, he saddled up again, slow and reluctant, and rode down. The woman's head snapped up at the sound of hooves. Her face was hollowed by hunger, eyes fierce with the kind of pride that lives just long enough to starve you. The girl lay curled in her lap, still and pale as a dropped rag doll. "We'll move along," the woman said before he even spoke. Her voice was raw, cracked by dust. "We just need a bit of water. She'll wake up soon." Elias said nothing. He pulled the canteen from his belt, handed it over. The woman hesitated, eyes flicking to his face, perhaps expecting cruelty, or pity, or worse. But he only waited. When she unscrewed the cap, her hands trembled so bad she spilled most of it on the dirt. She tried to feed the rest to the girl, but the child's lips barely moved. The silence between them was unbearable, heavy as thunder before a storm. Then, from somewhere deep inside that little body, came a whisper. Soft. "Barely there. Can you take her, instead of me?" The words didn't make sense at first. Elias blinked, staring down at the girl. Her eyes were open, wide and unfocused, staring at him as if she could see right through to whatever ghost he carried. The mother stiffened, choking on a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "She's not right from the fever," she said quickly, clutching the child closer. "She doesn't mean—" But Elias knew better. He knew the sound of surrender when he heard it. The girl reached out a hand, small and trembling, and brushed his glove. He flinched, not from her touch, but from the warmth that came with it. He hadn't been touched in years. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the wind answered, dragging dust across their feet. Finally, he unhooked the second canteen from his saddle and set it beside them. "There's a spring behind the hill," he said, voice low, rough with disuse. "Stay till morning." Then he turned and walked away. The woman called after him, but the words were swallowed by the dark. He didn't turn back. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring out toward the fence line where he'd left them. The moon hung low and red, casting everything in the color of old wounds. Somewhere out there, he imagined the child's breathing slowing, the mother's heart breaking in silence. He thought of Martha's grave under the cottonwood tree. He thought of the last thing she'd said to him. "You've got too much mercy for this land, Eli. Don't let it die when I do." He almost laughed at the memory, but the sound stuck in his throat. Just before dawn, he saddled the horse again. The air was cold and clean, the horizon faintly blue. He found them still there, the woman slumped against a fence post, the child asleep across her lap. The frost clung to their lashes like white dust. He crouched beside them, touching the girl's forehead. Still warm. Breathing slow. The woman's eyes fluttered open. "I told you we'd move on," she murmured. "Didn't mean to trespass." He studied her for a long moment. There was pride still in her face, but behind it, a crack of something softer. Desperation, maybe. Or courage. He nodded toward the distant ranch house. "There's food." Shelter. You can stay till she's right. She shook her head instantly. We don't take charity. He almost smiled, the first ghost of one in years. Then call it work. Fences need mending. Barn needs patching. Her gaze followed his hand as he gestured toward the broken posts, the sagging rails. For a second, she seemed ready to argue. Then her shoulders sagged. Just for a while, she whispered. Just for a while, he echoed. As he lifted the girl into his arms, her head fell against his shoulder. She smelled like dust and sunlight, and he felt something old and aching shift inside him, like a door unlocking after years of silence. When they reached the ranch house, the rooster crowed, cutting through the dawn. The sound startled him. It had been months since it had crowed at all. He looked down at the little girl's hand, clutching his coat even in sleep, and then at the woman walking beside him, her chin high, her steps unsteady but proud. Elias Boone had thought the land was done giving second chances. But as the sun crested over the ridge, spilling light across the broken fields, he realized the desert still remembered mercy. It had only been waiting for someone to ask. The first morning in the Boone ranch broke soft and strange. Mist hung low over the corral, curling around fence posts like ghost breath. The world seemed hushed, as if it, too, was holding its breath to see whether kindness could still take root in such a place. Inside the old bunkhouse, Clara Mae Dalton woke to the creak of wind through the boards. Lila still slept, face pressed into her mother's arm, cheeks flushed with the first color of health she'd had in weeks. Clara touched her daughter's hair and closed her eyes in quiet thanks, not to heaven, but to the man whose silence had saved them. Through the window, she saw him already outside, feeding the horses, his movements deliberate, precise. He didn't look toward the bunkhouse. He didn't have to. She could feel the weight of his solitude pressing through the distance. By midday, she'd washed their few clothes in the trough, hung them along the fence like surrendered flags, and asked him, timidly, where she could help. Elias Boone only nodded toward the barn. "Roof's been leakin' since spring," he said. "You fix what you can. Tools are inside." His voice was deep and quiet, like the earth itself was speaking. Clara nodded. No more words passed between them. But that small exchange, that permission, meant more than bread or coin. It meant she wasn't invisible. Days folded into one another like worn pages of the same prayer. Clara mended the roof, patched torn feed sacks, and gathered eggs while Lila followed the ranch cat, laughing softly through the dust. Elias worked the fields, the steady rhythm of his axe and hammer echoing across the land. Sometimes he'd leave a pail of milk on the porch. Sometimes she'd leave warm biscuits on the rail outside his door. They never spoke about it. But the offerings stayed, like two rivers slowly learning to flow toward each other. At night, Clara lay awake, listening to the coyote cries fade into the far hills. She thought of the whispers in Gallows Bend, fallen woman, drifter, charity case. She wondered what they'd say now, knowing she slept under a stranger's roof. Shame burned through her like fever, but when she looked at her child curled beside her, peace took its place. There was no shame in surviving. There was only breath, and that was enough. One afternoon, while gathering water from the spring, she found Elias kneeling by the cottonwood tree. She'd seen it before, a lonely sentinel behind the house, but never dared go near. Now, from a distance, she saw the small wooden cross nestled in its roots, the soil worn smooth from weather and grief. He wasn't praying. Just sitting, hat in hand, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the horizon. She approached slowly, the bucket swinging at her side. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He looked up, startled. "For what?" "For intruding." He shook his head. "Ain't your fault she's gone." The simplicity of it stilled her. The desert wind brushed her shawl, and for a heartbeat, the two of them just stood there, survivors of different fires, joined by silence. Clara crouched and set a few wild desert lilies beside the cross. "They grow near the spring," she murmured. "Seemed wrong not to share their bloom." Elias stared at the flowers for a long time, jaw tight. "She'd have liked that," he said finally. It was the first gentle thing she'd heard from him. That evening, thunder gathered far to the west. The air turned thick, heavy with the smell of rain. Elias climbed onto the barn roof, hammer in hand. Clara, stubborn as ever, followed with a lantern. "You'll fall," he warned. "So will the roof," she answered, smiling faintly. The storm broke while they worked. Rain sheeted down, soaking their clothes, blurring the world into silver and shadow. He held the lantern steady while she nailed down the last shingle, their hands brushing once, only once, but long enough to feel the pulse of something waking between them. When they climbed down, soaked and shivering, Lila was waiting at the door, clutching 2 blankets. She wrapped one around her mother and handed the other to Elias without a word. He stared at the small gesture, as if the child had handed him something sacred. After that night, something shifted. He began to speak a little more, about the ranch, the seasons, the old ways of tending the land. Clara began to hum when she worked, a low tune her mother once sang during storms. Lila followed him sometimes to the stable, asking endless questions. He didn't mind. The silence around her laughter seemed to bend, softer somehow. And for the first time in years, Elias Boone found himself smiling without realizing he was doing it. But the outside world had a cruel way of noticing when peace bloomed in places it didn't belong. The whispers reached Gallows Bend by way of old Josie Harrow, the storekeeper's widow who thrived on dust and rumor. "That Dalton woman's livin' out there with Boone," she said over coffee. "Ain't right, a child and all." The words spread like dry grass fire. And before long, they reached the ears of Sheriff Warren Gable, a man who liked his justice loud and his compassion small. Clara felt it before they came. A restlessness in the air, a shift in Elias's eyes. He'd seen the riders cresting the hill, torches flickering in the twilight. He didn't tell her yet. But she knew. That night, as the wind scraped dust across the window, she sat with Lila asleep on her lap and whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. "Lord, if you mean to test me, make me brave this time." Outside, Elias stood under the cottonwood, hat in hand, watching the stars vanish behind clouds. He could feel the storm building again, not one born of thunder, but of men. Still, even with dread in his chest, he felt something else too. A pull toward the small bunkhouse where a light still glowed. A warmth that didn't come from fire, but from the laughter he'd begun to hear there each evening. It was strange, he thought, how a woman and a child could walk out of the dust and bring life back to a place he'd buried with his heart. He didn't know it yet, but he was already willing to stand for them, even if it meant standing alone. The storm came the next morning, not from the sky, but from the road. Elias Boone saw the dust first, rising like smoke in the east. 3 riders. Then 5. All with rifles slung low and righteousness gleaming in their eyes. The one in front wore a badge. Sheriff Warren Gable. A man who could quote the law but not compassion. Elias stood on the porch, hands steady at his sides, as Clara and Lila watched from the doorway behind him. The wind pushed dry tumbleweed against the steps. Even the land seemed to brace itself. The sheriff dismounted slow, boots thudding against the ground. "Boone," he called, "you got a woman and child hidin' here. Folks don't take kindly to that kind of thing." Elias said nothing. His silence was a wall, and Gable hated walls he couldn't break. "She's a wanderer, come from God knows where," the sheriff continued. "Town says she's yours now, livin' in sin under your roof. That true?" Behind him, the other men shifted, muttering. Clara's breath hitched. She stepped forward, voice trembling but proud. "I came here with nothing but my child. We've taken nothing we didn't earn. If the town wants to call that sin, then let it." Gable smirked. "You don't talk to the law that way, ma'am." When he reached for her arm, Elias moved faster than thought. His hand caught the sheriff's wrist, firm, unyielding. "Take your hand off her," he said, voice low, grave deep. It wasn't a threat. It was a truth that left no room for argument. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the Colt holstered at Elias's hip. "You'd pull iron over a stray woman and her brat," he sneered. Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was the sound of a gun being cocked. After a long, stifled moment, Gable yanked his arm free and spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Boone. You'll regret talking in other folks' shame." He mounted up, the others following. Dust swallowed them as they rode off, their silhouettes shrinking against the sun-bleached hills. When they were gone, Clara turned to him, trembling. "You shouldn't have done that. They'll come back." He looked at her then, really looked, and there was no anger in his face, only a strange, quiet peace. "Let him," he said. "This land's taken everything worth keepin' from me once. Not again." Tears stung her eyes, not from fear this time, but from something she hadn't felt in years, safety. Lila ran to him, small arms wrapping around his waist. She looked up, eyes wide. "Can you take her instead of me?" she asked again, echoing her words from that night at the fence post, but this time her voice was light, trusting. She smiled shyly. "Can you take us both?" Elias knelt, the movement slow and reverent, as if kneeling before a truth he'd finally stopped running from. His hand brushed the child's hair. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I reckon I already have." That evening, the clouds rolled in, heavy, dark, full of unspoken reckoning. Elias knew the sheriff would return. Men like Gable couldn't bear to leave kindness unpunished. He sent Clara and Lila inside, told them to keep the lamps low. Then he waited by the fence, rifle resting on his knee, the cottonwood tree swaying behind him like a witness. Sure enough, the torches came, a line of flickering orange cutting through the black. Voices shouting, hooves pounding, thunder rolling in answer. Elias rose to his feet. The wind caught his coat, whipping it around him like a preacher's robe. He didn't aim the rifle. He only stood there, tall and still, the storm lighting him in flashes of white. The men slowed. Perhaps it was the sight of him, or the sound of the thunder rolling closer, or maybe it was the small figure that stepped out beside him. Clara, shawl clutched tight, jaw set with the courage of every woman who ever refused to kneel. Behind her, Lila peeked through the doorway, a halo of lamplight framing her face. "Go home," Elias called out to the riders. "Ain't no sin here worth burnin' for." Gable's voice rang out above the wind. "You protectin' her makes you one of 'em, Boone. You know what that means." Elias took a step forward, lightning flashing behind him. "I know exactly what it means." And the thunder answered for him, a roar so loud it drowned the courage right out of the mob. One by one, the torches lowered. No shots were fired. The desert wind rose, scattering sparks into the rain. Gable spat again, furious, but fear had already taken the fight from him. "Let 'em rot," he growled. "Ain't worth dyin' for." He turned his horse, and the others followed. Soon the night swallowed them whole. When silence returned, it was almost holy. The rain came harder now, washing away the dust, the footprints, the years of loneliness. Elias dropped to his knees, face to the sky. Clara joined him, and they both laughed, a sound half weeping, half relief. Lila ran out into the rain, twirling, barefoot and wild. The cottonwood shuddered, heavy with water, leaves glistening like silver coins. For the first time in forever, Elias Boone felt the land breathe again. The fences stood straight. The cattle stirred. The house, once hollow, glowed faintly from within. A home, remade from ashes. At sunrise, they planted a small seed near the cottonwood, Lila's idea. "For her," the girl said, looking toward the grave beneath the tree. "And for us." Clara smiled softly. "For everything we lost, and everything we found." Elias pressed the soil down gently, the earth damp and forgiving beneath his hands. When he stood, light washed over the plains, gold and endless. The air smelled of rain and redemption. Narrator's reflection, addressing the viewer. "They say the desert don't forgive, but that's only half true. It remembers. It remembers mercy longer than it remembers sin. Some folks in Gallows Bend still talk about the mad rancher who took in a woman and her child, and how the storm came that night. They say he stood against 20 men and the devil himself. But the truth is simpler. He just remembered what it meant to be human again." The camera lingers on the cottonwood, 3 figures beneath it, a man, a woman, and a child, their shadows stretching long in the morning sun. "So if you ever find someone broken by the wind," the voice continues softly, "don't ask what they did to deserve kindness. Just pour the water. You might save 2 souls instead of 1.